Can you guys hear me? I think I might need to. Well, good morning, everybody. It's gorgeous outside. I'm really glad to be in here with you. I'm really excited to share something that I've found really thought-provoking, but I'd like to start by saying I have met... Ooh, I need to move this. Aha. I've met many people who want to convert me to their way of thinking, their political persuasion, maybe their favorite brand or pastime, or their religion. Many of you have had similar experiences, but have you ever met anyone who wanted to convert you to a denomination? When I was in high school, I had many friends who were members of various denominations and churches, and they insisted they were Christian, just as I considered myself to be, yet they were also strangely insistent that their particular brand of Christianity was better and different, while still being the same. As I continued on life's journey, I met more people who considered themselves to be the same basic religion as I was, yet who were also sure their type was better, more enlightened, and more worthy of membership. Some of these friends were members of the LDS Church or Mormons. Ironically, it was all these people's insistence that their religion was the same, and yet so different I needed to switch to theirs, that helped me question the use of denominational labels. And later that helped me question the use of all religious labels. It was confusing to me. I thought, if you're Christian, you're Christian, right? Well, isn't it like the difference between picking an Epson or a Lexmark printer? Still a printer, and it doesn't alter your life profoundly, right? But as I've lived and I've learned more, I have learned that social groups like denominations do make a difference, because they shape the ideas people encounter and the way they're raised. We're all encumbered a little bit, and we're also freed by our upbringing and culture. But what if you had been raised in an organization like a cult? What if you were cloistered from all contact with outside people, outside ideas? Would you even be able to think about leaving if you had no basis for comparing your culture to anything else? How could you even see through your own mental blindfold, your own blind spots? Let me introduce you to a book and a person that can help illuminate some of the answers. This is Escape by Carolyn Jessop. Escape is the autobiographical account of a woman who grew up in and later left with much difficulty the Fundamentalist Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, which I will call the FLDS for short. It's sometimes known as the Fundamentalist Mormon Church. This is not exactly the LDS I mentioned earlier. The FLDS is sort of a spin-off religion, which even many LDS members are not shy about calling a cult. The FLDS exemplifies the kind of authoritarian indoctrination the North Texas Church of Free Thought and all free thinkers stand against. Carolyn Jessop's story is weird and chilling and awe-inspiring. As you read this book, you'll find yourself amazed that these events could happen at all, and incredulous that they happen in the United States in modern times, and as we've seen in the news, they continue today. This is actually from the Dallas Morning News. This is December, and this is actually a story about some of the Jessop children. So they've been in the news very recently. Let's see. Oh, okay, I'm going to read this from the cover. I was born into a radical polygamist cult. At 18, I became the fourth wife of a 50-year-old man. I had 8 children in 15 years. When our leader began to preach the apocalypse, I knew I had to get them out. Carolyn Jessop grew up in a cloistered FLDS community in Colorado City, Arizona, near the border of Utah, with her mom, dad, and siblings. Love in their household was often overshadowed by the growing influence of the religion and the prophets of their community. Physical abuse, often intense, was seen as a normal part of relationships between spouses, parents and children, teachers and children, the bus driver and the children. The prevalence and intensity of this violence makes me wonder, how are violence and indoctrination so commonly found together? What is it about fundamentalist values that serves as a breeding ground for these methods of control? This book has really whetted my appetite to learn how humans tick. Despite the abuse Carolyn endured, A surprising bright spot was lit in her young life. The FLDS prophet instructed her father to add an additional wife to his household. To Carolyn, her dad's new wife was an unexpected example. She was young, independent, happy, she had her own apartment, and she was educated. A spark was ignited in Carolyn's mind. She correctly deduced that the new wife's demeanor was shaped by education. Carolyn vowed to get an education and be as independent as her culture would allow. This decision, this valuing of education, altered the course of her life incalculably. In her book, she calls her education her salvation, the deciding factor that saved her and her family. Her early life was full of many struggles, but the biggest of her challenges was always pursuing learning. It was hard for anyone to get much of an education in her community, but garnering an education was especially hard for girls. They were often suddenly and secretly married off, never to return to school. Yet Carolyn persevered and graduated high school and college, which is a rare feat for anyone in her community, and she graduated college even after being married to Carolyn Jessop, the 50-year-old man mentioned on the cover. Now, I want to mention it's important to note that she got an education not because her husband was overly kind and lenient. It was because the prophet wanted a few of the teachers to have a little bit of education. And that later changed. Carolyn was also not allowed to choose her own field of study. She was allowed to go and learn about education, being a teacher, and that was it. This is her husband, in the middle there, with his first 6 wives. Carolyn is far right. She's far right there. So just to give you an idea, the next picture shows what a family portrait can be like with only 3 or 4 wives. This is not the Jessop family, but it is a polygamist family. Picture all of these people living in one house. Now, picture a few more wives and their children added. FLDS children are taught that plural marriage, a husband having more than one wife, is a blessing revealed directly from a deity and a prophet. Marriage to Merrill was certainly a revelation to 18-year-old Carolyn, but I don't mean a divine one. And that's Merrill again. Not only was she forced into a physical relationship with a man who hardly acknowledged her presence, she was thrown into a house full of wives, children, chaos, jealousy, violence, abuse, poverty, and power struggles. I can almost assure you their lives are impossible to imagine. You have to read about it. And after you do, you won't wonder that Merrill and one of his wives have been on trial recently. It wasn't just home life that was harrowing. Danger was ever present in the community. Wives, children, and neighbors spied on each other and reported to the elders of the community. Any misstep was seen as punishable defiance against God and the prophet. Disobedience could be a social death sentence. Carolyn observed firsthand how FLDS members that didn't toe the line were treated as wreckage. And of course, brandishing the threat of hell was a handy mental and emotional weapon leaders used to keep people in line. And for many years, Carolyn's loyalty to her religion and the prophet kept her in line. It wasn't just the local police, all of whom were FLDS members, who enforced the rules such as women can't drive or leave the house without the husband's permission, and the husband must know where the wife is going. The cult's rules were also self-enforced by members like Carolyn, who at first couldn't yet imagine or pursue an alternate life. Amazingly, even more dangerous than her violent husband, controlling sister wives, and constricting culture was a prophet whose power and influence were growing and who is featured in the news lately, Warren Jeffs. How does a tyrant come to power? Is it easier when people are indoctrinated, when they're brainwashed? Is it easier when the previous leader was well-liked, or at least when the people who didn't like the leader left? Warren Jeffs' power was cemented when his father died, making Jeffs the new prophet. Slowly but steadily, his grip on the community tightened, and the changes were ominous. As you read, it's really blood-curdling to picture yourself trapped in that community, unable to leave, observing the warning signs. Picture this. Clothing became more restrictive. Chapters were ripped from textbooks. Books were confiscated. Education was eroded. Jeff's taped sermons were coveted and listened to with awe. He often spoke of calamitous end times, another common theme among charismatic and controlling leaders. People were made to fear the government and those outside the FLDS even more, which caused out-group hostility, which centralized and strengthened the cult's powers. And this is something I wasn't expecting. Animal abuse became horrific. It makes me wonder how devaluing life and losing empathy may be tied to certain other social conditions which thrive under cult leadership. Community members were afraid to speak out, afraid to be reported, afraid to express opinions, even in their own houses. People disappeared. Jeffs himself was hard to find, even though he began taking and assigning even more and even younger wives. Here is a picture of him with one child bride and another on their first anniversary. I think the breaking point for Carolyn came when her daughter was invited to a special party at the prophet's house, a party just for preteen girls and the prophet. Warren Jeffs' preaching about moving the community to a walled compound in Texas, from which no one would be able to escape, became suddenly very real. You guys have probably heard of this ranch in Texas. Carolyn saw the nooses tightening around her family's necks, and she knew her window of opportunity was closing. She had to act decisively, quickly, and soon. I've told you a little bit about Carolyn Jessop's story, but the best is yet to come, and I will let you read about it for yourself. The protagonist is engaging and endearing, and the story is verbally and technically easy to read, although I do have to warn you, and I'll warn anybody who wants to read this book, it includes descriptions of abuse, and, it's not always emotionally easy to read. It has some adult themes. And like most detailed biographies, it's a little hard to keep track of all the people involved. And what adds to the slight confusion are a few details which Carolyn seems to have omitted to protect the people she had to leave behind. But overall, this book is mind-opening, and it's great for anyone interested in history, sociology, psychology, religion, education, civil rights, and government, and it will really give you a new perspective on some current events. Reading Escape will make you wonder, what is it about human individuals and societies that makes some of them more susceptible to indoctrination than others? Are some religions more easily crafted into fundamentalist cults? Is cult susceptibility a danger inherent in most superstitious mindsets? Through Carolyn Jessop's eyes, you'll catch a glimpse of how strange beliefs take root in communities, how people are seduced and used by cults, how women are affected by stringent patriarchal societies, what it's like to be pregnant all the time, and how, through a life of struggle and a drive to be honest, one brave individual came to see through the veil placed over her eyes by her culture and her religion. How did Carolyn Jessop escape? How did she even come up with the idea to do so? Is the ability to flee indoctrination a rare feature, or are most humans capable? What if you or someone you knew was born into a cult or convinced to join a cult? Based on what I've learned from this book, if I were to create a care package for people in a cult, this is what I would send them. Critical thinking skills, perspective, and support. First, Carolyn's critical thinking tools included observation, analysis, a questioning outlook, and willingness to accept her discoveries objectively. These are traits many people have, but they can either be encouraged and honed or suppressed with fear. Carolyn chose to face the fear. Second, her perspective came from gaining an education that reached far beyond what the group leaders wanted her to know, and from meeting people outside the cult. One kindly outsider was pivotal in opening her eyes to the dangers of the FLDS, and none too soon. The young Carolyn might have followed her upbringing and looked with disdain or mistrust upon this grizzled old man who was an outsider to the FLDS, but Carolyn's objective observations of the outside community had shown her there was more to life than what she was told. And thirdly, even all of these advantages I've mentioned would have amounted to nothing if she hadn't had the right support. Friends willing to help her flee, and professionals willing to address her practical and legal needs in the battle that embroiled her family afterward. Carolyn Jessop is a living example of the hope people have of escaping their oppressive upbringing if only they have the right tools. Carolyn had the tools of education and friends outside of the cult, both of which are tragically increasingly rare commodities for FLDS members. She continues to reach out and share her story. Perhaps it will help those who are in danger of future indoctrination and those she had to leave behind to escape from the clutches of a cult to free thought.